Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is episode 7 in our series on the art of game design by Jesse Schell.
Hey, John. How are you doing?
Hey, Matt. I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little under the weather. I've got this gravelly baritone I'm wielding today, so...
Yeah, it sounds good.
Oh, yeah. So maybe if I can manage to get sick every recording session.
Yeah, just maintain like a low-grade cold.
Low-grade
cold. For the purposes of your voice.
Yeah. I've never managed to pull that off, because I would if I could, but maybe this time this will be a permanent modification.
All right. Well, so we got 3 chapters today, right?
I think these are the chapters everybody's been waiting for.
For sure. I mean, I feel like this is the real meat and potatoes of video games.
So
or games in general.
Into mechanics.
Hell yeah.
And right off the bat, he kind of... It was kind of reassuring because he basically says a lot of what we were saying, where it's like, what is a mechanic? Like, it's impossible to... No one has this really precise scientific definition of what a mechanic actually is.
Yeah.
Which was clear in that last episode when we were talking with Mike.
Like, I definitely have a very broad view of what a mechanic can be. I feel like it's any decision by the designers that directly influences or anything where the player is interacting with the game in a way that the designers crafted.
Right. And I think...
Which is very broad. I mean, it could refer to so many different things. Like, I think I was referring to, like, music cues as mechanics. Like, walking into a room and the music kind of fading away, and all of a sudden you're, like, in this... You know, it's scary because the music went away for some reason.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was the perfect example of something that I didn't think was a mechanic.
Yes.
That you defined as a mechanic.
Which is totally fair. I don't think it is a mechanic. I don't think most people would think that that is a mechanic. But just to me, the way that I like to think about game... and I think this might come from, programming, because if you're programming, you're thinking along the lines of like, okay, the player's entering this like trigger zone and this different music is going to pop up. And it's something that you are sort of crafting in order to influence the player, have an effect on the player. But it is, I don't know. I think most people think of mechanics as the things that the player can do. And I think I just have a much broader, kind of incorrect, like thinking of mechanics. But anyway, my definition aside, I think this is important to kind of lay out because I'm probably going to use the word mechanic incorrectly. So, if the listeners are realizing that, they can feel free to send me angry emails. But I'm also I try not to be too pedantic about this sort of thing. So,
but let's get into what Jesse Schell, or as his usual tactic, the list of things that he has listed that make up mechanics, the categories of mechanics.
Okay, I'll list them all off. So we got space, time, objects, actions, rules, skill, and chance.
Okay. Each one by themselves feels like a whole
an
world.
Entire universe.
Yeah. So space. I mean, obviously, like, quite literally feels like the whole universe. I think I don't know. Do you have any opinions about aspects of space mechanics that make a good game?
Yeah, like, I really... I think something that's very popular these days in games is these like open world games, where you just feel like you have so much space to explore. Like Elden Ring recently came out, and that's a game in the Dark Souls series. And where the old Dark Souls games were very linear, or they weren't linear, but like you've kind of felt like you're on a rail a little bit. Elden Ring just kind of explodes that, premise or that concept, and you really do feel like you can go anywhere, anytime. And so I do think space is something that's so important to the feel of a game, where if you feel, limited, if you feel confined, that can sometimes be a good thing. In the case of maybe like a puzzle game or something, you'll often feel confined. But that's like, it actually improves the gameplay, if anything.
Right. The constraints or the challenge and the interest actually comes from the constraints with respect to space.
Right. And also games that try to make the player feel like they're in this enormous space, I think are really awesome. And I think game creators are getting better and better at like creating that mentality. Like I remember there's an old game called Daggerfall, which is actually a game in the Elder Scrolls series. And Daggerfall had an enormous world. Like if you just held the forward button down, you'd hold it down for like a week in real time or something in order to like travel across the world. But the world didn't feel that interesting. It didn't feel that crafted.
It was all procedurally generated, right? That's how they got.
It was, I don't know if it was procedural or not, but it was like, it was probably procedural at some point, like while they developed it. I think everyone was playing on the same world is what I mean. But it just wasn't, it didn't feel crafted. Like it wasn't like some person had gone over every square inch of the space and been like, oh, I think it'd be cool if there was a tree here. Like most of the space just felt very programmatic, or it felt like it was generated with like a doubly nested for loop or something, So I feel like that wasn't, and I love Daggerfall, by the way. It was, when it came out, it was this amazing game. But even though it had this huge space, it didn't actually feel, to me at least, like it was huge. It just kind of felt repetitive. Whereas Elden Ring feels like this enormous space because literally every area you move into feels unique. There's different creatures roaming around, and like you see these crazy buildings and mountains in the background and glowing trees and stuff.
And you can actually go there, presumably.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. Which is so important, and something the Dark Souls series has always done well, where if you're seeing something in the background. In fact, I would argue that Dark Souls 1 was like a huge innovator in this space, where anywhere you are in the game, you're seeing things that are like at different points in the game.
Yeah.
And you go to them. Like, I don't think there's a single thing in the game that you can like see in the distance that you can't go to, except for like, skybox mountains or something.
Right, right. But this is the thing, and this is what's so cool and innovative about these new games is like more and more of what was previously implemented by just, okay, we're just painting an image in the skybox is like, no, we're going to actually have the whole world like fully like, so we, more and more, like you don't even have a skybox. You just, you have a skybox, but it's like the sky, literally just the sky.
But and it's crazy. I feel like games are just getting very good at creating a sense of like real space that actually feels huge, which is really exciting to me because I love that feeling.
This may be getting into some of what he talks about in the next games about like he touches on ramping people up into like the difficulty, but there was this really cool post on Twitter I saw about how a game like Elden Ring does progression, where you and I have talked about this before, where how do you design a game that's both open world but also doesn't reveal, like just immediately reveal the most difficult monsters in the whole land to the users. And there was this really cool visualization, and I'll see if I can add a link to it in the description, where essentially, yes, at the beginning of the game, for new players or for any players, you're going to start on rails. And have I explained this in on Switch Statement already?
Explained what?
the way you get an open world game that allows for a progression of difficulty.
Oh, I don't think so. No.
Okay. I just wanted to double check myself. So anyway, you start in this like little dungeon, and there is a small section that presumably, if someone who already knows how to play the game, they can just blaze through it really quickly and get to the rest
Yeah.
of the game.
That's
But
what
then,
I did.
what's that? Yeah, that's what you
That's,
did.
that's what I did.
No time for the tutorial. Just got to get to
Yeah,
the
screw
good
that.
stuff. So then it would lead you into this kind of central. It was kind of like a hub and spokes model. You can think of it where it's like, okay, they lead you into this kind of medium difficulty hub, and then leading out from there are all of these progressively more difficult range like places. And yeah, like at that point, it may be a very short period of time till you get to something that's incredibly difficult. But the point is just that if you're a complete noob and you don't even know how to swing the sword yet, you're not accidentally encountering the final boss of the game, essentially.
Yeah.
But
No,
I thought
totally.
that was very clever.
Yeah, and I thought that Elden Ring does a really good job of that. Elden Ring also does a really good job of like, if you wander into a scary area, you feel scared.
Yeah.
They just have like creatures there that are like, okay, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm gonna go back. Either that, or some trebuchet like smashes you in the face with a huge stone ball or something, and you just realize like I should not be here.
Yeah.
Another thing that I feel like these games have to be very wary of is items, like basically power-ups, where all of these games have these amazing items. Like Elden Ring has swords that are, actually Elden Ring does a very good job of like fairly balanced weaponry, but there are some swords that are just legit, and if you were to get them early in the game, you might have an advantage. And I think that this has been a real struggle, especially for modern games, because of the internet, where one of my favorite games of all time, Morrowind, I think that Morrowind existed in that sort of cusp time, area where the internet, people were definitely using the internet to like find things or follow game guides and stuff, but it wasn't as big as it is now. So Morrowind has really, really amazing equipment that you can just go to in the very beginning of the game. You can just walk to a specific place and like pick up one of the most amazing pieces of equipment in the game.
Interesting.
And I mean, I still love that game so much because I think that as a person who's playing the game, if you were to stumble on something like that, it was just such an amazing feeling.
Right.
Like the game had a very good exploration reward system, which I think is very hard in modern games, because in modern games it's like you just find an internet guide to like, oh, how do I get the best sword in the game, and it's like you just walk there. So I think modern games just can't do that sort of thing anymore.
That is very interesting. Yeah, I don't know how. I'm sure there are clever ways you could solve that, and I mean maybe it does have to do with, and maybe this is something like with No Man's Sky, where everyone technically is playing in the same world, but you're able to procedurally generate something that is, to your point before about Daggerfall, does feel handcrafted enough, and then has these rewarding surprises.
I think that handcraftedness is so important. I like games that have handcrafted areas, but like procedurally chunk them together. Like a modern example is this game called Returnal, where it's a roguelike where you crash land on a weird planet, and it's exactly that. I mean, it's all these handcrafted rooms, but it like chunks the rooms together in a different way every time you restart the game. And it's
That's
really
a very
interesting how they
new.
did
This
that.
is just in the last couple of years, right? Returnal. This is on the PS5, right?
Very new game. It's a pretty cool game. I got it the other day. I've been playing it. But
Actually, what I want to say is, I want to take a step back. For all of these games, from the aspect of mechanics, movement is actually fairly uninteresting, right? Like, it's just this continuous space where you're walking around, right? And like,
Yeah.
aside from, I guess, the surface areas where the player is allowed to walk, there's not that much to the movement mechanics. Is that, would you say that that's correct?
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, there's a couple variations to that. Like in Elden Ring, you know, you have a horse. You can do if you're on the horse, you can double jump. There's also these weird like platforms that if you jump on them, you fly in the air. And there are some like key systems, like Metroidvanias often have these gates and keys where
Yes.
you have to kind of get the key in order to get in the gate. I think Returnal has some of that stuff where you have to get the sword in order to like destroy these red, you know, weird barriers. So there's some of that sort of stuff, and I sort of consider that all to be mechanics and, you know, mechanics that unlock movement within the space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, generally these open world games have pretty standard movement mechanics. At least the base movement mechanics are pretty standard.
There's a game. All right. And we should probably move on because actually we've been talking for 20
Yeah,
minutes.
we've only covered space. What about time?
All right, maybe there was actually one more game that had some of the most interesting movement semantics. There's actually a couple of games, and I'm just gonna Google for them really quickly. Um, okay, I'm not gonna remember the other one because it had a crazy name. But there's a game called Manifold Garden,
Oh yeah.
which you like space repeats on itself. So like you can and there's like it's a puzzle game as far as I recall, and like you need to remember how to, or like you need to get to certain places in the world. But like let's say you fall off a platform, like that platform is going to exist in like a parallel universe, and then
Yeah.
you're going to land again on that same platform or like offset from that. And so that was I thought was very cool. And there's another game that's an even better example of interesting movement mechanics. Have you ever heard of Echochrome?
Echo Chrome, yeah. I think we were sharing the soundtrack for that to
Yes.
each other.
Yes, it has a great classical soundtrack, very simple visualization, and an amazing movement mechanic system where, and again, I have a habit of describing things that don't transfer well for verbal descriptions, but so let's say you have, imagine kind of like an extended rectangular prism, right? And then there's kind of a gap in that rectangular prism, right?
Okay.
So you'll have a character that's kind of walking down the top of this, extended rectangular prism. It looks like a walkway, like a catwalk or something. So then you may have another parallel running, or sorry, perpendicular running rectangular prism,
Okay.
and then your control scheme as the player, you have to rotate the whole world, and then if you can move these two, like move the camera such that it looks like the one catwalk is covering the gap in the other catwalk, so you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
see it, the player is allowed to walk across it, because from your perspective as the player, there's no gap. You can't see a gap. And then the player is allowed to walk across it. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like mind blown in this original game.
I love that stuff. Yeah. Which it's funny because you don't see that sort of thing very often, but that's something that video games can fairly easily do.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's obviously no physics in video games, so you can do these reality breaking things.
You can say a hole only exists as long as you can see it. So
Right. Exactly. So I don't know. It'd be exciting to see more of that sort of thing.
but yeah,
Good
let's move on. So mechanic 2 is time. Do you have any? I don't know. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time was interesting to me because sometimes when I am making games, like there was this game that came out called Vampire Survivor that got really popular. And so I was like, I love, every once in a while when I see a game that I like to code up like a version of it, kind of a crappy version of it. And I coded up like a crappy Vampire Survivor. And I realized that something that's so important in a game like that is how long every little thing takes. And you reach a point where like it starts to feel like every millisecond matters. You know, It's like how quick is this creature, this bat that flies at you? You know, does it move at 10 meters per second, which I guess is super fast, or does it move at like 10.5?
Yeah.
And that actually makes a tremendous difference from the gameplay perspective or just how the game feels. And so I feel like time is one of those things where human perception is so time based.
Yeah.
And, you know, human reaction speed is a very specific thing. And having everything kind of exist on that edge of like human reaction speed and, you know, the ability to perceive what's happening. It's just so important to making the game feel interesting.
He goes into this in the next chapter after, which I forget. It's all about balance, and I think this is exactly what he gets at, where it's like there's all these tiny. It's a trillion tiny decisions that you need to make, and it's not a science. And it's funny because I guess in a way you probably could come up, like if you understood enough about human perception and human psychology, you may be able to come up with one godly formula for this. But it's so difficult because it's indirect, right? The speed of a single bat character causes this like emergent experience for the player, and you can't know until you actually play it how that value is going to affect the experience. And to your point, I feel like a very small difference in that speed can cause a very large change in the player's experience.
Exactly. It's basically chaos theory where you're just dealing with so many variables. And the funny thing is, it's all in the balance up in the air, and you change one single variable. Like say you change the player movement speed. You add, 0.5 meters per second to their movement speed. And all of a sudden everything that you've done goes out the window. Like you now have a completely different game.
Yeah.
That feels just utterly different. And so it's wild. I think that's one of the things that is probably where good designers develop this intuition about things. And it's got to be almost impossible for like a new designer to just come up with the right values, at the outset of something.
Right. Whereas, or even like guess initial values for these that are even reasonable.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I definitely struggle with. I mean, it's super fun to tweak these values. So, I kind of like struggling with it, but, I think that over time, if I were to design a bunch of games, I would start to develop this intuition.
Oh yeah. Now, let me ask you this. What is your opinion on timers in games?
That's a great question because I hate timers. I think I dislike when I'm aware that I'm being timed. And I also dislike when the result of something is based on how quickly I was able to do that thing.
Interesting.
It's funny because I feel like there's ways that games go about it where you are timed. Like in Mario, like lava is rising, and if the lava hits you, you're dead. And I love that. Like I have no problems with that. So maybe it's just a laziness thing where if I feel like I'm explicitly being timed, it just feels lazy to me.
Yeah.
And that bugs me. But I mean, because obviously time is such an important thing. And like if you give players infinite time to like solve some puzzle, it just becomes, I don't know, futile or useless or something where it's not really difficult at that point. But I don't know. Yeah, what are your thoughts on timers? Because I think I generally don't like them.
I agree. I feel like it's more impressive when you have a game designer that is able to come up with an informal timer, like you're saying, where it's like, okay, instead of just like slapping a timer on the screen, there's some other visual indication, and they're able to do it that way. And Jesse Shell alludes to that. I
Yeah.
feel like I'm also thinking about in board games where I feel like sometimes there's almost like timer. Like the word that's coming to mind is like fetishism, where like people get like too caught up in the timer and the game like moving along at a time, where it's like if everybody just like chilled out, it would be fine if there was no timer. Like,
Yeah.
and it's like actually the fact that everyone's getting so caught up about the game moving slowly is like much more annoying than the game moving slowly itself. And I guess
Oh
that's
yeah.
obviously like a subjective opinion, but
It's also funny, like I immediately think of chess, which I know I talk about a lot on this show, but chess literally has time controls.
right.
Where, you're playing a 3-minute game, you have 3 minutes to make all of your moves in the game. And it creates all these weird meta strategies that I do think are amazing for chess. I mean, I think it's worked out really well for the sport or game of chess. But to me, it feels really meta. Like it feels like I'm going beyond playing chess. I'm now strategizing of like, where am I going to spend most of my time? I have to have a better understanding of like, this position probably has some crazy tactical move, so I should spend a long time looking at this position. Whereas
Oh,
these other
interesting.
positions are, kind of, ordinary or whatever. So I move faster. So you have to have this weird kind of meta understanding of chess, which I find, simultaneously interesting, but also outside of like the game itself, if that makes sense.
You turn time into a resource that players need to manage, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. Another thing I have in my notes that I wanted to mention about time is these days there's a lot of these battle royale games that are very popular, like Fortnite or Player. What is PUBG called?
Oh,
I just call it
Player
PUBG.
Unknown Battlegrounds. Yeah, I think.
Yes, Player Unknown Battlegrounds. That's the weirdest name ever. But anyway, there's both a space element where you start the game in this massive space, and there's actually a fairly high likelihood that there's going to be no one around you. But there's also this time element where there's this constantly shrinking force field that kills you if you fall outside of it. So you have to, as the game progresses, you have to slowly get closer to all the other players, which I think is just a brilliant mechanic. And
that's-
obviously it's worked super well.
That's a perfect example of not just making it a clock, using
Yeah.
time in a way that and there's another game to use more of like a board game example. Like it's a really good way of solving the problem of like the timer problem essentially, where
Uh-huh.
there's a game called Sketch It, and there's no formal timer. It's basically think of Pictionary, but everyone is drawing a word simultaneously, right? And then depending on how quickly you draw, like if you're the first person done, you can get more points basically.
Yeah.
And so then like but the tension here is you only get those points if someone guesses your drawing correctly. So you're always in tension of speed versus the quality of your drawing. And again, like it's just better in my experience. It's just a more fun thing where it's like, yes, it keeps the game moving, everybody's working, as compared to like Pictionary, where either you have the timer and everybody's like yelling at the person to just be like, "Hey, come on! Like, why are you taking so long?" And like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, yeah, this person can take as long as they want to draw this thing, and when it's on their turn, but they just know they're gonna lose. And at that point, like, it's just a good forcing function to reinforce the speed, as opposed to like in Pictionary when you have a timer, you have to literally like there's nothing else. It's like they can just be like, no, fuck you, I'm gonna keep on drawing. Like if they want to be really like, you know, I don't know, obstinate about it. But
Yeah. No, that sounds pretty cool. And I've always hated when someone, there's a lot of games that come with like a little hourglass.
the hourglass.
And there's always a guy at the board game party who's like, we got to
Taking it
use the
way too
hourglass. And it's
seriously.
like, yeah, it's like, I just want to, I don't really invite those people to my board game sessions anymore. It's just
Exactly.
annoying.
That's actually, it's not for the game. It's for knowing whether or not you should invite that person to the party next time.
Exactly.
All
You
right.
want to talk about objects?
I do want to talk about objects. I think
The lens of the state machine. I
Oh
got
my
triggered
gosh.
a little bit.
very exciting. I just
Yeah.
love when anyone talks about or thinks of things in terms of state machines.
It's great to see that term outside of computer science.
It is interesting because there keeps on being this tension, I feel like, with this book between he's writing a book for programmers making a video game versus he's writing a book for anyone making any kind of game. And then
Right.
like every once in a while you see his like programmer side like really, really shine.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's fun to see.
That's not to say that normal games can't have or like non-video games can't have the concept of a state machine, and in a way I think if you frame it as a state machine you'll probably come up with a more consistent conceptual model for your game. But
Right.
it is funny because like the state machine, like I'm not exactly sure how like the object section is like the best place for a state machine.
Yeah, I do sort of see them as orthogonal. I see objects as like the nouns of your system.
Right.
Like, your game has a cat in it. You have a cat object. And a state machine might be just, I guess, over time, how, like, I guess an object can be a state machine. Like the cat can be in like a purring state, and certain actions can sort of branch out from purring.
Yeah, I guess
they're
that's the
related.
thing because it's an object is the thing that holds the state.
Right.
So anything that has a state machine that defines its behavior is almost certainly an object, right?
Yeah.
I guess unless it's like the game itself, I guess could also have a state machine.
Right. Which I mean, I do think you can think of a game as one huge state machine. And I think a lot of board games, this makes sense to think of a game this way. Where at
Yeah.
any given moment, the game is in a certain state. In fact, chess is thought of this way a lot, especially for the purposes of like AI, where you literally have a game state. From that state, you can branch out to whatever, 25 other states. And in this way, you can build this tree structure of like all of the states that are possible. And you can sort of figure out which states are better based on some heuristic.
Huh. Wow, that's interesting. I guess I always think about it in more of these like finite state machine conceptions where there's just like 7 states that something can like oscillate between. But now, like, at least if you think of chess as its whole state machine, where literally the entire state of the game is represented at every, state.
Yeah.
That's-
I think that's a valid way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
I do think that what you're talking about, where maybe you have an object that has like some status on it.
yeah.
Like I'm trying to think of an example. Like
Well,
you have
he gives a perfect example. He talks
great.
about the ghosts in Pac-Man. And so
Yes.
there's 5 different states, and they can either be in the cage, chasing Pac-Man, fleeing Pac-Man, finishing fleeing Pac-Man where they're flashing, and then kind of returning to the cage, I think.
yeah.
And so, which is great because like that would really simplify the logic of programming it, because it's always clear at any point in time, okay, how should we be drawing this character and what should they be doing?
Right. He also mentions the lens of secrets in this section, which I thought was interesting I literally, in my notes, I only wrote lens of secrets. So I don't know if you can give more context to that.
Well, yeah. So he talks about who knows what in the game, right? Like the questions that you're asking are like, you know, maybe none of the players know this information. Like in Clue, like what the answer to the riddle is. Like just only the quote unquote game knows this this fact. And so, yeah, like this is something I think that if we're talking about our game, there are some interesting potential avenues we could go down with information hiding. Like,
Right.
you know, what does the DM, we've talked about having the like DM that controls the gods and the players. It's like, what does the DM know that the players don't know? Or what do the players know that the DM doesn't know? And so I think there's a lot of, this is something where I think I don't think we have a name for the game yet, but for our game, I would like us to be intentional about, because I think there's good opportunities for information hiding.
Yes.
Actually,
I do love information hiding.
One quick proposal that I just thought of this morning was he talks in a later chapter about the joys of exploration. And I was like, oh, maybe the states of the tiles are hidden at the beginning. I thought that could be like a very cool thing where like you actually have to, you're incentivized to like explore the board.
I love that. Yeah. No, I mean, that sounds great. And maybe as you reveal tiles, maybe there's like a chance that there could be a resource on them or something.
Right.
And so you get rewarded, which I am a huge fan. I mean, this actually goes back to what we were chatting about earlier. I love games where exploration is like a strong mechanic in the game. And there I go again saying mechanic when I don't even know if that makes sense. But like in Morrowind, if you explored and if you really looked in every nook and cranny of like a cave, you literally might find like a legendary piece of equipment, and it was just so satisfying.
Right. Yeah. I think let's move on. I mean, objects are obviously massive, but I think conceptually they're quite simple. Like, literally, like it's just something that someone can have or like be near, and it can have attributes and it can have states, and like obviously you can imagine a trillion different objects, and like picking the objects in your game is a super important thing to be intentional about. And this all comes up with balance, and you will need to tune the different attributes. But I think conceptually they're not that interesting to me. It's really just like how you want to, you can just come up with any crazy series of attributes, and you can do cool things with them.
I think in that regard, it's a very useful and valuable concept, because to most people it's just very like intuitive. Like, even we're programmers, we talk about objects all the time, but even to a non-programmer, they hear the word object and they have a good conception of what it means. Right. So I think it's just clearly a valuable concept to use across many different disciplines, I guess. Actions. This was a fun section.
Louder than words.
They do. I really love this notion of emergence. Mm-hmm. This is literally the only thing I wrote about in this section, where I think one of the best things about games, sports, board games, video games, is this notion of emergence, where you create a mechanic, but out of that mechanic comes some, unique, almost unexpected way of influencing the game or interacting with the game. And sometimes people name those things, like in chess, there's all these different things. There's like, for example, if you line up your
defense.
Zuckertort defense. Like if you line up your piece with the king and there's a piece in between your piece and the king, that's called a pin. Mm-hmm. And it's not like it's not like the people who came up with the rules of chess were thinking like, oh yeah, and then there's going to be this like pin thing. That's a mechanic that arises out of the other mechanics, but now it has this cool name and it's very like tactical when you do it, and it can be this really, really powerful thing. Right. I had another example in Morrowind. There's a jump skill, or it's like a spell, and if you cast jump on yourself, you can just jump higher. You can reach ledges or whatever that you wouldn't normally be able to reach. Mm-hmm. But if you get a very powerful jump skill, you can actually leap across the entire map, and it becomes this way that you can like travel.
Fly. Yeah.
And I remember like just absolutely loving that, where, most games these days have like fast travel where you just click an area in the map and you go there instantaneously. But in Morrowind, it was like, I'm going to beef up my jump skills so that I can legit jump across the entire map. And it was just this amazing,
and you wouldn't like mechanic. Die on the end of that jump?
Well, that's the other thing, is you could cast like this feather fall on yourself. Mm. So you would do the jump, and as you're about to die, you would like feather fall. And it was amazing. I mean, maybe the creators of Morrowind thought that this would be possible, or they knew it would be possible, but in any case, it was just this really cool, as a player of the game, it was this really cool mechanic that kind of arose out of these other mechanics.
Well, this is actually one thing that's interesting to me because it's basically like, we talked about the concept of recipes in our last video, and it's basically like, your game is good or has a good set of possible actions if they can create these interesting recipes, that have interesting effects. One of the things that I actually wanted to ask you about, and I'd be curious to hear what your understanding of this was, but so in the emergent gameplay section, he talks about how, there are strategic actions and there are basic actions. And, and just to give the examples he gives, he says, okay, a basic action is move a checker forward or jump an opponent's checker. And so this is kind of this like atomic action. And then he says these strategic actions are protect a checker from being captured by moving another checker behind it. And so I guess I'd be curious, like, do you remember reading about like or the difference between strategic action and basic actions?
I do recall that, and the way my brain thought of that was the basic actions are kind of the direct things that you can do. Like I'm always using the example of chess, but in chess, basic actions are like literally how the pieces move. Like you can move a pawn up 2 squares. And then strategic actions are more so like, in chess, another super important concept is like pawn structure. Mm-hmm. Where over the course of like 5 or 6 moves, you might move certain pawns to certain places on the board to create certain, structures. You might do a bathtub structure or like a pawn chain or something. And that was at least how my brain perceived that section.
And so I guess one way to conceive of it is the basic actions are almost like the prototypical actions, where it's like devoid of any context. One of the things you're allowed to do is just move a piece from here to there.
Exactly. I really like that phrase, devoid of any context. I think that's an important phrase for this.
And so like, right. So then strategic action is almost like you look at all like, okay, apply the set of basic actions you can do to the situation. You have all this list, it could be infinitely long for certain games. But actions that are good given that context, I guess, become strategic actions.
Right. And I think so. I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think that strategic is moving into emergent. Like, for example, in Elden Ring, you might have someone attacking you, or you might have a group of things attacking you. And you might move like behind a tree or something, or move behind a rock so that you can kind of like channel the enemies towards you one by one. And I would say that that's a strategic thing. You're using this basic movement to create this strategic scenario, and you're almost producing this emergent property of the game where you can like kite enemies. And in fact, that's another thing where an emergent property developed a name over time, like kiting
Called
enemies.
kiting. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, where you slowly move away, and then you turn around and attack, and then you move away and you turn around and attack, and the enemy basically never gets a chance to hit you because you're always maintaining your distance. And a lot of people call that kiting. Really, really common in like StarCraft or RTSs, where if you're more maneuverable, if you're faster, you can kite other things.
Right.
But yeah, the actions might have been my favorite section. I've always loved this notion of emergence, and I think this is another sign of like a skilled designer, where I think skilled designers are probably good at coming up with mechanics that kind of synergize and produce these emergent properties.
Yeah.
Whereas more, kind of nubular designers like you and I probably struggle to come up with the mechanics that can be combined in interesting ways.
Right. And this is something, it's almost like a game smell. Like there's a section where he talks about verbs that can act on many objects. Like I have this strong belief that like if you provide an action, like you should be able to do it to like anything, or like, and so the game smell is like, oh, you want to add an aspect to this game, but like you can only use it in this like very specific scenario. Like that always feels like very weird and like contrived. Whereas
I
like,
hate that.
It's always impressive to me when, you have these very simple set of possible actions, but then like there's all these different possible things that you can do as a result of them. And like one example like of this to taken to the extreme is a game. It's like I don't know if you've ever played one of those like alchemy games where like you start with like 4 elements and then like you can combine like fire and water and then that creates steam. And then like literally there's only one action, right? It's combine or it's like mix. And so, but like you can create all these like, you can keep on mixing and like it's unbelievable how much time they must have spent. Let's like think up like, okay, like what is like energy plus water, you know what I mean?
Right.
But they did it. They came up with like pretty good explanations. So it's something like that where, and like that's obviously the idea taken to extreme where there's literally one action and then it can always apply to anything basically. But that impresses me, especially if they've managed to like come up with a game that remains balanced.
No, totally. I'm always impressed by that too, because it seems easier to keep the number of mechanics small so that you can sort of account for all these permutations. But some games just have this outrageous number of mechanics, but it does seem like they all interplay very nicely. And I don't know. I think that's just the sign of a skilled designer. Yeah.
And this is something like, again, if I'm thinking about, I'm just going to call it Godland. It's not, this is just like this handle that I'll use for it. That's not its final name. But in Godland, I'm a little bit concerned that we're coming up with mechanics that won't generalize. Like we can come up with fun things that you can do with them in a specific case. It's like we've talked about the smelting place where you can make iron, but like maybe that's the only building that we can think of, and then like you can just make the smelter, and then it just feels dumb because that's the only possible like manufacturing place.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Godland. I think at the point where Godland is right now, we need to kind of trim down some mechanics. And I think it's good. We had the sort of explosion of ideas. Now we need to see what sticks and pick and choose.
Indubitably. All right. Rules.
I hate rules.
All right. No rules. No rules in Godland. Everybody it's like Calvin Ball. You just always make up the rules when you start playing.
That would be amazing to have a game like that. Where
I
it's
don't
like
think it
as you're
would.
playing the game. Maybe as you're playing the game, like each player can occasionally just pick a new rule, and then every other player has to like abide by that.
Dude,
from that point forward.
Oh my gosh, dude, I would be very surprised if someone hasn't already made this game.
I think there is a card game that does that.
But it's like, yeah, we didn't playtest this at all. I don't know if you've ever played that.
It sounds familiar. I don't know if I played it or not, though.
That is essentially that game where it starts out. You start out with basic, like the rules are you draw a card, but then like, you know, when you play a card, they might completely change, you know, the semantics of the game. But like that game it's so fast paced. Like literally you could draw a single card that just says like I win and then that round is over. Like it's just like it's and most games last literally like 2 rounds. But I think it could be interesting if there are no rules aside from like you draw the rule cards at the beginning and that like any sort of game could arise out of that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a promising concept. But yeah, I mean, this section was interesting. I like the point where he said a game is its rules.
Yes.
Because I think that's a powerful and very true statement. So it's just, you know, as a designer, I think developing what your set of rules are is just so important.
It's interesting because I think as a programmer, he talks about this concept of foundational rules, which is essentially it's like the platonic ideal of your game that is and to give an example, you know, he calls out like maybe the foundational rule is a random number is selected between 1 and 6 and you know that defines X, Y, and Z. And then like the operational rule is like you roll a die to get that. But like at the end of the day, like the goal is to generate a number between 1 and 6. And it just so happens that like you're going to use a die to like implement that rule.
Right.
I feel like I would almost want to start, and maybe this is maybe this is a programmer pitfall, but like I would just like to just define all of the like abstract rules of my game to the billionth degree.
No, I wrote down domain specific language
Yes.
for this section because, you know, I love domain specific languages.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like, you know, every game kind of has its own domain specific language that you could sort of, as a programmer, you could sort of build the game in the abstract in order to test some concepts out. I think that's a really valuable thing.
One thing in this section that I really believed in is it needs to be really clear what the goal is. And I think I would want to go back and make sure that for Godland, it felt clear, like not only clear what the goal was, but that the goal, given the setting of the game, made sense in that context. You know, like yes, because I feel like you could have a clear goal that like doesn't fit with or like doesn't make sense, and I think that's still a bad goal. You know what I mean?
Totally, yeah.
Like Pandemic. I feel like Pandemic is a game, and I know we've talked about Pandemic before, but like, it's just a really fun game. But like, the goal is so clear, and like the motivation is so well established. It's like, boom, simple story. A pandemic is is bearing down on Earth and gonna wipe out the whole set of.
It's like 4 separate pandemics, which is hilarious.
Yeah, and it's like, all right, solve it. You know, cure all of them. And so, like, even just describing it now, I'm like, all right, like let me go find the nearest copy of Pandemic and like solve that crisis.
No, it's so true. Pandemic is kind of a masterclass in a lot of these sections we've been talking about. Like I'm just now thinking of time and how Pandemic manages time by like slowly ratcheting up the number of infections and how well that works as a mechanic. And the
To a certain
urgency
extent,
of
I
it.
feel like we're basically stealing a lot of Pandemic's mechanics because we talked about
Yeah.
like the gods where they're like, and maybe that's the goal is like the gods are going to like make an at the risk of making this even more like Pandemic. The gods are going to like destroy the world if you don't, satisfy their mercurial desires.
Hey, I mean, copying is great.
Great artist copy.
Yep.
All right, skill.
Skill. I like this section. I like the points about real versus virtual skill,
Yeah.
where, a real skill is like how good you are. Like I'll use Elden Ring as an example. Real would be how good you are at like dodging at the right time when an
Yeah.
enemy is attacking, or how good you are at attacking in order to take advantage of an enemy's weakness. Whereas virtual is kind of what level is your character. And, through a combination of real skills and virtual skills, you can finally beat certain tasks. And people who have extremely high real skill, and this is actually a thing in the Dark Souls series to like play through the entire game at level 1.
Yeah.
People who have really, really amazing real skill can beat the entire game at level 1, which as a player of these games, I just find it to be completely insane that they can do that.
How does that work? How can you like? It seems like when you kill strong monsters, you would just level up intrinsically. How does the leveling system work?
Well, in the Dark Souls series, you need to level your character. Like, you gain souls or runes in Elden Ring, and you spend runes in order to level your character. So these people who do, they're called SL1 runs, like soul level 1.
Oh, okay.
These people who do SL1 runs, they're just not leveling their character. So they end the game with like 10 million souls or something because they're not using them. Mm-hmm. But it's an amazing demonstration of like the balance of real versus virtual. Like a mediocre player like myself, I need to rely heavily on these virtual skills. And, I have some real skill, but not that much. So mostly my character is beefed up with virtual skills. And I think it's a cool concept. I think it's a really, it's a testament to good design when players can sort of make up for their lack of real skills by building up a little bit of these virtual skills.
It's interesting because I feel like most games don't even give you the option to see. They're just, and that was probably intentional by the Dark Souls designers. Is like, you know what? We're actually gonna give people the ability not even to level up, and then just do it on their own personal skills, which is wild. Like, one question I have: do they have better armor? Do they have better like?
Well, that's another thing is a lot of the best gear in these games is locked out from low level characters because there's like attribute requirements for some of this gear. So you need to like level up your attributes in order to wield, some big sword. So these SL1 runs are super duper impressive for a lot of reasons.
Wow.
One thing you can do is you can level up basic gear. Like, gear itself has a level. Like, you can forge a sword into like a better sword or whatever. And I think a lot of SL1 runs don't do that just out of principle, but I think some of them do. I think, sometimes it's allowed to like level up your gear. But you're still using like really crummy gear. It's just like leveled up a little bit.
Yeah. That's wild.
There's also damageless runs. If you want to really get into this, there's a dude called, I think his name is the Happy Hob.
So he doesn't
like
take
that.
damage at any point during the run.
He literally does not get hit. The entire game, he does not get hit. And he plays through all of the games consecutively. So he'll play through the entire... Some people call it Soulsborne because it's like Dark Souls plus... what's the other one called? Something Born.
Dragonborn or...
No. Why am I'm like totally blanking on this right now, which is crazy. Anyway, there's another game in the Dark Souls series... Bloodborne. Oh my god, I can't believe I couldn't think of that. But anyway, so some people call this run a Soulsborne run, where you play through every single game Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and you never get hit. You don't take a single hit.
And he's done
it's
this?
Insane. He's done it. Yeah, in one sitting, 20 hours or something, play through the whole entire thing, SL1, never get hit. It's
God.
like...
Well, this is
it's
the thing.
an
Of course, if
achievement.
you're never hit, then of course you don't need to level up, right? Like,
Yeah, you just slowly whittle away at these bosses. But it's hilarious because if you're at SL1, you have to hit a boss like 80 times in order to kill him. So you're you're sitting there with one of the most dangerous bosses in the game,
just like dancing around.
dancing around, and you have to spend like an hour just like chipping away at his health bar. It's truly, I mean, you want to talk about like the spectrum of human accomplishments. In my opinion, like this is on the far end of like the spectrum of human accomplishment. Like it's completely amazing.
This is why I think these games, Elden Ring, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, like they're perfect because you can do, like, if you want to do it all real skill, like you can. And then like if and this is the other funny thing is, like, even if you do lean heavily into their virtual skill thing, like you still need a lot of real skill too. But
Yes.
at the very least, you can kind of like raise or lower the real skill requirements, I guess.
Yeah. Dark Souls has definitely done an amazing job at sort of bringing back the feeling of gratification from accomplishing something in a game, which in my opinion, has been slowly lost over time. You know, just that feeling that I beat this. I feel great that I was able to beat this. And Dark Souls has maintained that, and it's pretty amazing. It's impressive. It's a testament to their good design.
Let me ask you this. Is it possible in these games to level up your virtual skills to the point where it feels easy?
You can definitely level up your virtual skills to a point where, you know, you can beat the last boss fairly easily, I would say. But it's still going to be, you know, you can't sleepwalk through it.
Yeah.
It's still going to be a little tough, and you would have to spend a long time farming.
Yeah.
So it's kind of these balance
Trade-offs, yeah.
Yeah. Anywho, so the last mechanic is chance, and I feel like that's one that, you know, obviously super important. You know, pretty much well, I don't want to say any game, but lots and lots of games have this element of random chance. Board games have dice rolls and things like that, or spinners. Video games have random number generators.
Right.
But, you know, I don't know. I think it's similar to objects, where it's one of those topics that's fairly intuitive to most people, I think.
Right. Well, this is what's funny, and he goes into this, is sometimes it can feel intuitive, and then actually you realize you don't actually understand how it works.
Yeah.
But again, like this feels similar to my thoughts about about real skills versus virtual skills, which I don't know if I actually said it. Like, I think I would want to make a game that is all real skill, but then, like, in reality, it would almost certainly just be not fun to play because it's just too difficult, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of games these days that are mostly real skill. Like, I think Celeste is an example that I would use, where
Now, you can't level up your character at all in Celeste?
I don't think so. Not that I recall. So it's just pure platforming.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much skill. But I think what Celeste does is they modulate, you know, because there's always going to be this thing where really good players are going to want really extreme challenges.
Yeah.
And the way that Celeste modulates that is they have like all these side quests and stuff.
Yeah, those little strawberries.
Exactly. So if you're a really good player, you have to like really flex your muscle to get that stuff. But a mediocre player can still play through the game and beat it.
Yeah. But so the way I tie this back to skill or like chance is, I feel like I would gravitate towards wanting a game with very little, or like one idea that we talked about for Godland is the idea that you shake up these initial conditions. And like, I almost feel like that's like the only chance I would want. And then it's all skill from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a fan of board games that have very little chance associated with them, like very few dice rolls. So I think I'm into that.
And that's partially like that's one idea that I really like about the idea of a DM is because otherwise, if you don't have a DM, I feel like you would need to turn to some like random chance, and then I mean, obviously, like a DM is a potentially chaotic element, so maybe there's still some random chance with respect to how they're deciding to play the game, but
Yeah.
at the very least, it feels less random.
Right. Yeah. So the only other thing I wrote down about this chapter, so he does this whole probability math lesson
Yeah.
that I'm not sure what we would cover about that in a podcast. I also wrote something about old trash talk, and I don't even know why. I don't know if there was like an example of like some old person, not old person, but like, years and years ago, making fun of some other
Old
person.
trash talk. I don't remember.
Because I wrote that I'm a huge fan of old trash talk, and there's an example that I absolutely love. It's completely unrelated to this chapter, but there was this pianist who was a contemporary of Chopin named Sigismund Thalberg,
Yeah.
and at the time, Sigismund Thalberg was hugely popular. He was kind of like the Justin Bieber of his day. Where today we don't even know who Sigismund Thalberg is because Chopin, was clearly this brilliant
trounced him.
musician. Yeah, well, over time, I think it's sort of people have come to realize that there was true value in what Chopin was doing, and maybe not as much, or maybe superficial value in what Thalberg was doing.
Are you
Although I don't
saying
want to.
that people are not going to remember Justin Bieber as a master musician.
This is the disclaimer that I was about to throw out. Is I don't think I'm the right person to make any of these judgments. I'm just, I'm just talking about things that I've sort of observed.
Justin Bieber is a genius. All right.
But Chopin has this statement that he made about Thalberg that I don't even understand, but I just absolutely love it. Chopin says, "He plays splendidly, but he's not my man. He's younger than I and pleases the ladies. Makes potpourris à la muette." I have no idea what that means. "And he produces his piano and forte with the pedal, not the hand. He takes tenths as I do octaves and wears diamond shirt studs." So that's what Chopin says about Sigismund Thalberg, which just sounds like I really don't even understand what it means, but it feels like a complete like evisceration of Thalberg. Like Chopin was just like laying waste to him in the parlance of his time, which I just find to be hilarious.
What I'm taking from that statement is he said Sigismund Thalberg has virtual skills and I have real skill.
I think so, and it seems like time has proven him right.
That's true. All right. Well, I think we really only barely got through this one chapter on mechanics. But I think as we discussed, there's a lot here. I think we'll have to leave keeping it all in balance for the next episode. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Balance and puzzles.
What's that?
Well, puzzles, I think we were also supposed to cover the chapter on puzzles today.
In theory, yeah. Puzzles is a short one, so maybe we can sneak that in the next episode. Okay, so just and then a note: did we say we wanted to have another brainstorming session, another prototyping?
I think that could be fun.
Now that we want to apply all the stuff that we've learned from this mechanics chapter. So let's say,
Yeah, why don't we do it?
yeah. All right. So there you have it. So the next episode, we're going to do another prototyping episode with these mechanics, thinking about space and time and chance and all the others. And then the next book chapters will be, continuing to talk about balance and puzzles. So,
Awesome.
all right. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, Matt, you too.